Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our faculty colloquium, which independently, if we have any foreigners in the audience, will be held in English, as it is a part of the English language studies, as you might know by now. Welcome to Professor Dziembowski, Stefan Dziembowski, from our sister faculty, Mathematics, Informatics and Mechanics, opposite side of the street, who is an expert, theory expert, in Bitcoin and blockchain matters. So as you might have read in the abstract, he put a disclaimer there. He'll not give any advices connected to investments in Bitcoin. He studied and got his diploma at the faculty of Mathematics, Informatics and Mechanics, then PhD in Aarhus, several postdocs in different places of the world. And now he's our neighbor, and hopefully we shall profit a lot from his lecture today. So now, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me here. So yes, this is going to be an introduction to blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And yes, I gave this disclaimer that I'm not going to give you any advice about how to invest, because also I'm not investing myself. And like, I haven't invested when it was, in retrospect, the right moment to invest. So I'm for sure not the best person to give advice on this. And I'm a computer scientist. I'm not an economist. So I will be talking about computer science aspects of this and not about, all these aspects like what is the meaning of money and all these things that is interesting for the economist. I'll give you some short historical overview, and I will present some slides with some different views on whether this makes economic sense, but economy is not the main part of this talk for sure. Okay, so this is the plan. I will give you first some short introduction, and then I will talk about main design ideas of Bitcoin, and I will tell you a little bit about my own research area. I have over 60 slides to show, which probably means I will not manage to do it within 1 hour, so I may probably skip some part of this last point, but I'm also happy to discuss it after my talk, and feel free also to interrupt if you have some questions. Okay, so what are cryptocurrencies in a nutshell? These are virtual currencies that can be used for digital payments. Okay? This is how you could summarize it in one sentence. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by this on the next slides. So like, this is the situation with paper money, right? You have two people. You have like maybe buyer and a seller, and the buyer wants to buy something from the seller. So with paper, just give, say, $100 banknote to the seller and get something in exchange, right? This is how paying works. Now, digital would like to make it different, so would like to have some kind of like digital exchange of information, and then the product is shipped, or maybe some other digital good is delivered. Okay? So the change is simply that we would like to do it electronically, send bits, not paper money. And of course, ways to do it existed long before Bitcoin, right? So there were traditional ways to do it. So, for example, what could happen is, okay, we usually call these two guys Alice and Bob in cryptography. So Alice would send her credit card number to Bob, and then maybe Bob would talk to the bank, and then something could happen. The bank would maybe give money to Bob, so Bob would know that it is paid. Now, another way of doing it, very popular in Poland, is just to make some quick transfer from the bank, right? So this was traditional ways that existed before Bitcoin. And what were the main problems with this? So one main problem was trusted server. Okay? So you need a trusted server. You need some kind of trusted entity, like a bank or a credit card company whom you trust and who like operates all these things. Okay? And the money doesn't circulate, right? So it's not like, doesn't happen like with paper money. We can make several payments, and the money will be just circulating without anybody knowing about this. And here you always need a trusted entity for each payment. You had also high transaction fees, especially for credit cards, like 2% or 3% is quite a lot, and no anonymity, right? So the banks would know exactly what we're buying. Okay? So that was the situation until around a decade ago, when the following paper appeared online, and it's called, the title was Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, and the author was Satoshi Nakamoto, and that was the paper that changed everything. Okay? It doesn't really look like academic paper when you read it. Not sure if it was even written in LaTeX. I think it was even written in Word, which is like a good sign that the author is not a scientist, right? And yeah, but still, it's like, and it was not published even on any like public archive. It was just published on a web page on mailing list. Okay, but it changed the whole picture. And okay, so what was the thing that Nakamoto proposed? Yes. Okay, so nobody knows who this Nakamoto is, right? So this is a pseudonym, and yeah, it sounds Japanese. So people think maybe he's Japanese, but nobody knows. Okay. And he hasn't like revealed himself until now. It is based on the assumption that the majority of the computing power in the system is honest, and I will explain you later what it means. So the system is called Bitcoin, and the currency unit is called Bitcoin, and it can be divided down to 8 decimal digits. So it's and the smallest unit is called Satoshi. Yeah, I checked today. This is a slide that I have to update very frequently because the price of Bitcoin changes so quickly. So today, one Bitcoin is $7,500, and the total market cap, so number of Bitcoins times the value, is 135 billion. Okay, so it's quite significant. Okay, so that was Bitcoin that was proposed by Satoshi, and I'm going to explain most of my talk today is about explaining how it works. Okay? I should just mention that there are many different coins, of course, proposed after Bitcoin. Some of them more famous, some of them less famous. Many of them have fancy logos. And this is just a very small part of this whole picture, like hundreds of different currencies. Okay, so recall the problems that we had with previous approaches, the banking approach, right? So, or the credit card approach. So we had trusted server, yes, this is what we didn't like, high transaction fees and no anonymity. So in Bitcoin, there is no trusted server, and the money is circulating. And that's like the main point of Bitcoin. Okay? Transaction fees were low initially, now they are not that low. And anonymity is not really there. It's actually sometimes even maybe worse than normal banking. It's called, what Bitcoin achieves is called pseudonymity, but doesn't achieve anonymity. So it turned out that actually this first feature is really important for people, that there is no trusted server. People don't really care in real life so much about strong anonymity. Okay, so what does it really mean that there is no trusted server? So we don't have any bank, anything like this. We just have the users connected over the internet. Okay? Everybody can join the system, so nothing like, I need to register somewhere to join the system. I can just start using it when I want. That is called also permissionless, so I don't have to ask for any permission to use it. The users are not registered, and they contact each other directly. Okay? So thus people talk to each other. There's nothing like central Bitcoin server. Okay? And that's why it's called peer-to-peer network. Okay? This is what's used in computer science. This name peer-to-peer network is used to denote networks where there's no trusted server, just people talk to each other. And peer-to-peer networks existed long before Bitcoin. Okay? So it's not the main novelty here. Main novelty is to have peer-to-peer networks for the financial things. Okay, so since there is no trusted server, nobody controls the money. Okay? So it's not like any normal currency where there's like a central bank controlling it. It's just completely wild in some sense. But the system is designed in this way that the total amount of money that will ever be printed, and I will tell you later what it means, is 21 million. Looks a bit arbitrary, but it comes from some formula that I will later show you. So the economists would say if the supply of money is fixed, there should be no inflation, right? Because inflation comes from the fact that the countries are printing too much money, right? But of course, the price also is that the exchange rate fluctuates quite a lot, and much more than any kind of national normal currency would fluctuate, right? So this is the graph. I think I made this slide mid-2018, so it stops here. Now it's again up to like 7.5. Okay? It used to be like 8,000, I think, a month ago. So it goes quite rapidly up and down. And I think, I mean, this is also like a huge problem, right? Because it means that, I mean, nobody in reality wants to have a currency that fluctuates so much, unless he just wants to speculate. Okay? Okay, and there is this big question if Bitcoin is real money. Okay? And in some sense, the only value of Bitcoin comes from the fact that people expect that other people will still trust in Bitcoin in the future. Okay? So the enthusiasts, and there are many of them, especially young people, or libertarians, this kind of people, they say, okay, this is like all other currencies, right? It used to be in the past the dollar was connected to gold and other currencies were connected to dollars, so you could say that currency represents some real gold value, but it's not like this anymore, so they say, okay, it's just like dollar or euro, okay? Everything is virtual, Bitcoin is not different, okay? The skeptics call it a Ponzi scheme. This is an English word for what we call in Polish piramida finansowa, right? In English, it's called Ponzi because of this guy, Carlo Pietro Ponzi, who was the first guy who invented this, who implemented this in the US. It's a mugshot, so I think he ended up in prison. But, yeah. And there are some famous economists that are skeptics. Like the most famous one is Paul Krugman, who was like famous economist because he predicted some bank crash like 10 years ago, and he's constantly saying that, yeah, the value of Bitcoin will go down to zero soon. Okay? Also, The Economist, which is a very respected journal, not only in economy, but it's read widely by The Economist, says that it's a bubble. Okay? And they say people are buying Bitcoin because, okay, basically what I had on the previous slide, they call greater fool theory. So I know it's stupid, but I hope that I will find more people who are even more stupid in the future, right? But there are also some people who are more enthusiastic about this, and so far Bitcoin hasn't collapsed. Okay? So, you know, I mean, the good thing about predicting that it will at the end collapse is that you can always say that, yeah, not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet, and nobody can really prove you wrong, right? Because maybe it will still collapse in a month or something. Okay, so why did Bitcoin become so popular? This is one of the last slides I have about like kind of like historical introduction, then I will go more to technical things. So there are some ideological reasons, and there is this thing called cyber anarchism or crypto anarchism. So people believe that we don't basically need national states. We can just have like cryptography or network like organizing society, not anymore the national government. This is sometimes often connected. I mean, left-wing people like this are anarchists, right? Right-wing people are called differently, but from my observation in Poland, at least many of people who love Bitcoin are also like sympathizing with these parties like Korwin-Mikke, this kind of people, okay? Because this kind of goes very well with other things I believe. Okay, there was also good timing. So Bitcoin was released in 2008 when the government started printing massively money, right? Because there was this crash, banking crash. So that was called quantitative easing. But in fact, it was just printing money, right? So people started the feeling that they are losing. Then immediately, this thing that it like looks like anonymous became very popular for the criminals. So there was this Silk Road thing that was like, it was called eBay for drugs or something like this, and people were paying there with bitcoins. Initially, low transaction fees, of course, were a benefit. There are some downsides of this decentralization. So there are no regulators. Okay, so basically, everything can happen there. So, for example, if someone steals your bitcoins, there is not much you can do, right? And the most famous episode like this, the incident was it was called Mt. Gox. It was kind of like it was called an exchange, but in fact it was a bank, like Bitcoin Bank, and it disappeared with lots of bitcoins. It was like $500 million at that time. And the only people people could do is like, maybe at this point they were actually realizing that some kind of state regulation is not that bad, okay, but it was too late for them. Okay, so so that was the introduction. I don't have really much more to say about like economics and things like this. I will go now more to like technical things. Okay, Okay, so let's think about digital money. So, like, suppose we want to have money where we can just send, we want to have a system where we just send money like we send email, right? Without any trusted server. I mean, there's nothing like trusted email server for the whole world, right? So we could maybe think we'd like to have something like this for money, right? So suppose, like, what would be the most stupid idea that would come in the first second, and then you would quickly realize that this idea makes no sense? Like, have, for example, a JPEG file or a PDF file with a banknote with the serial number, and if I want to send it to you, I would just send it by email, attach it with PDF banknote by email, right? So what is the problem with this? Copying. Yeah, it's called double spending. It's the same, right? Copying. Double spending. So basically, nothing prevents me from like sending the same money several times, right? Because bits are easier to copy than paper, and because it's like the fact that I sent you some bits doesn't mean that I'm not having these bits anymore. With paper, it's like this, right? But yeah, you can use. There are some papers on like how to do it quantum, right? But I'm not going into this because like, yes, you can do it. Like you can do it based on some like, very fancy principles that you are inventing here in these buildings. But yeah, I'm not going to. Also because I don't know much about this. So okay. So what is the Bitcoin idea? So basically, the whole point of Bitcoin is an idea how to deal with this problem of double spending without having a trusted server. Right? So, I mean, the way we sometimes like to think in computer science is make something like a Gedanken experiment, right? Imagine that we have something, reduce the problem to this ideal thing, and then just worry about how to implement this ideal thing. Okay? So the idea of Bitcoin is this ideal thing will be public write-only bulletin board. Okay? So some place where you can all write publicly, and it's write-only, so nobody can erase. And then whenever I send a transaction to someone, I would just write it down on this bulletin board. I'm sending transaction, a coin number, something to someone. Okay? In fact, this is not how it's going to work in Bitcoin because it's like a little bit different. But for a moment, think like this. Okay? So I'm just coins have numbers, and I'm just saying, okay, I'm sending this coin to someone. Okay? And I'm sending this coin to someone, and it's written down on the bulletin board. Okay? So this would prevent double spending, right? Why? Because if I send a coin to someone, then this guy will already see that this coin was spent by me and belongs to this guy. Okay? So the whole world can see it, right? Because from this log, from this thing that's put on the bulletin board, you can simply read which coin belongs to whom. It's not anonymous. Like Bitcoin is very bad with these things. Okay? Forget about anonymity. Anonymity is not the strong point of Bitcoin. Okay? Sorry? Pseudonymity. Yes, you have pseudonymity because basically you are not required to tell who you are. You are just a number, and you can create as many identities as you want. But of course, this can be de-anonymized, and it's problematic. Okay? Okay, so write-only is also called immutable in this language, and bulletin board is called ledger. It's some kind of term from accounting, I think. Okay? So you have like a ledger, which is like a log. I think computer science is called log, where you just write which transaction happened. Okay? And then double spending is impossible, and we know who has what money. Okay? So basically, the whole point now is how to construct this ledger, okay? How to construct this public bulletin board. And of course, what we could do is we could say, okay, we have some nice company whom we trust, like Google, okay? Google Docs. Just ask Google to make like special kind of Google Docs where you cannot delete, right? And then it would be basically this what we need. What is the problem with this approach? Yeah, it's trusted server, right? So it's a nice solution, but it's not the one we're looking for. Okay, so basically the main design the main thing that needs to be discussed now is how this ledger is maintained. So how to construct such a ledger. And then this will take the most time. Then there are questions like how are the users identified? As I told you, people are not identified by their real names. Where does the money come from? If nobody controls it, like who prints the money? And what is the syntax of transactions? Okay, so how does it really work? Okay, so this is what we also call emulation in computer science. Okay, so you have like ideal world, which you have like we all have access to this nice ledger, idealized bulletin board, and you have real world where we have somehow to emulate it. So we don't have access to it, but we need what's called a protocol in computer science. Protocol is like an algorithm that tells people what to do, okay, in a distributed way. I mean, basically, it's the same as algorithm, except that it like describes situations where several things happen concurrently. So you need a protocol that would emulate this ideal ledger. Okay, that's the whole point. And the main difficulty, of course, is that some parties can cheat. So we don't have to believe that everybody is honest. So maybe these people are cheating, maybe these people are cheating. Okay, the green ones will always be the bad guys on my side. Okay? So they are like, maybe they are cheating, and we don't know who it is. Okay? Okay, so this is an idea that basically this is how people would answer this before Satoshi. So assume that the majority of the parties are honest. Okay, so we are here, I don't know, like 50 people. Assume that majority of us is honest. Okay, then you could, honest means that we always tell the truth about what happened. Okay, so then you could try to think, okay, maybe we can implement this idealized bulletin board by voting. Okay, so basically, when I have a new transaction and I want to kind of post it on the ledger, I just broadcast it to everybody. Okay? And everybody takes a note that some transaction was broadcast. And then if we want to establish, is this something a correct state of the ledger, then we could simply do voting. Okay? So we vote, is it correct? And you get that kind of like, then it's probably easy to see that if you have honest majority, then you can simply always say what the majority said, okay? And it will be like immutable public ledger. Okay? So this is a nice idea, and it could be used. And there are many people. This is like goes back to like early 80s in computer science. Like it's called Byzantine fault tolerance. Lots of papers on this. But there is one problem with this. So the problem is how to define majority in a situation when everybody can join the network, okay? And people are not identified with their names. So if you have a situation like this, that here you have maybe 3/4 are honest, okay? Because these 3 guys here are honest, the one here is corrupt, dishonest, okay? Looks good, but if he can produce as many identities as he wants, then he can just replicate himself in 5 copies, right? I mean, this is the same that happens with like on the internet, where you have like with Twitter fake accounts. I mean, the same can be done here, right? I mean, you can create many copies, and maybe it's just one person who is controlling it, right? It's called a Sybil attack in computer science. It's kind of like a trivial attack, but it has a name, okay? Where you simply make lots of copies of yourself, and suddenly you gain majority, although you're in minority. Yeah? That's why all these polls, like opinion polls on the internet, like click if you like the government or not, right? This makes little sense, because like how can you prevent people from clicking a lot? I mean, maybe they can make some ad hoc countermeasures, but in general, it's hard to prevent, right? So this is the same phenomenon here. Okay? Okay, so Bitcoin solution is to redefine the majority, okay? And instead of saying majority in terms of numbers, we will say majority in terms of computing power. Okay? And now creating multiple identities doesn't help, because if you have like 1/4, so you have like, imagine that we have 4 guys, and one of them is bad, and he's controlling one computer, and each of them is also controlling one computer, then if he's creating many copies of himself, it's still one computer, right? So it's much more resilient to these attacks where you have multiple identities created, fake identities. And then the question is, of course, how to verify it. Okay, so how to make voting kind of like voting when you vote with your computing power. Okay? And the way Bitcoin does it is Bitcoin uses something called proofs of work. And this is also a concept that was invented by cryptographers before Bitcoin. And proof of work is a method for proving that I did some work, computational work. Okay? And incentivize users to constantly devote their work. Okay? Initial idea of Satoshi was that people would use idle CPU cycles. Okay? So most of the time, your computers, even if you work heavily on your laptop, most of the time your computer is not used, right? So you could then maybe use your computer to participate in this process. This quickly became impractical. Now people are mining in, sorry, I haven't introduced it. So they are doing this work in dedicated hardware. Okay? This is why you hear about all these Bitcoin mining rigs These are all this hardware that is like participating in this process. Okay, so this is the main idea. We have the users that participate in the scheme are called miners. So they are kind of mining Bitcoin. I'll tell you later where this name comes from. And what they will do is they will maintain a chain of blocks that is moderately hard to extend. So it starts with the Genesis block. The block is just like some kind of like some sequence of bits, okay, like a megabyte. Okay? Bits. So it starts with big block called Genesis block that was generated by Satoshi January 2009. And then each 10 minutes you have a new block that contains transactions from the last 10 minutes. Okay, I'm simplifying things a bit here, but this is the general idea. Okay? So each 10 minutes there is a new block. It's kind of linked to the previous block. There has to be a link to the previous block, and there are new transactions. Okay? And it will be moderately hard to extend. So there is this chain of blocks, it's called blockchain, which is somewhere on the internet. You can go to there are many websites that monitor it, so you can go now and see what is the blockchain. And there is like last block, and everybody is trying to extend it. Okay? And this extension, this will be like the mechanism in which this voting is implemented. Okay? So it's hard to extend this. And it's made like this that it should be like more or less new block each 10 minutes. Okay? So it's like moderately hard. It's not like a super hard thing, but for the whole community of miners, it takes around 10 minutes to produce a new block. Okay? So this translates to, so the block size is at most 1 megabyte. So in Bitcoin, this translates to 7 transactions per second. This is one of the problems of Bitcoin that doesn't have high throughput. Because 7 transactions per second is not so much if it has to be a global thing. Okay, so proofs of work. I'm not going to tell you how they work exactly, but basically it's an idea introduced by Dworkin Naor 92. And they had this idea to make this as a countermeasure for against spam. Okay, so early 90s, it looked like spam is going to be a huge problem for email. Right? Now it's a little bit less because you have all these fancy filters that are like filtering spam. But 90s it was kind of bad, and it looks like it's going to be worse even. Right? So the idea was, before I accept an email from someone, I force him to solve some little puzzle for me. Okay? So I sent him some moderately difficult puzzle that would take a couple of seconds to solve, and verifying correctness should be fast, of course, because I don't want to put too much work on me. And yeah, and basically this means that if you want to send like millions of emails, you have to do million time couple of seconds, which is a lot, right? But if you are an honest guy who sends like maybe 50 emails a day at most, then it should be unnoticeable that you have to do all this work. Okay? So this is basically like to make sending email more expensive. Okay? Okay, so and Bitcoin uses a variant of this and it's built using hash functions. I'm not going to tell you details what hash functions are, but basically, just to have it on one slide, it works like this. You have proof of work, and you have this guy called prover and the verifier. Okay, so prover is the guy who will be doing work, and verifier just verifying if the work was done. So in this case, prover is the one who sends the email, and verifier is the one who is verifying if the guy is really did work. So verifier serves him some puzzle, so like a sequence of bits, maybe chosen randomly, right? And prover has to find a solution, which is also some kind of a bit string, solution S for puzzle X, send the solution to the verifier checks if S is the correct solution, and there is a security parameter, so it says, or hardness parameter. Hardness parameter, maybe it's a better name. It says how hard it is, okay? And should be like exponential on this side. So by making n sufficiently high, I can make it like maybe take 10 minutes, or maybe take 1 hour, or maybe take 10 seconds if I want to be fast. And verification should be very fast, okay? I don't want to work too much myself. Yeah. So these are like proofs of work, and you can build several of them. Probably if you sit down after this lecture and try to invent some of your own proof of work, it will also work. Maybe even based on some problems from physics. Okay? Like just think about some problems that are on average hard to solve for a computer. Okay, so how they are used in this blockchain. So you have these blocks like block I, and it contains transactions from last period and a solution for xi minus 1. This is not written on the slide, but maybe it will be clearer on what I'm going to show you next. So based on this block I, there will be a new puzzle, okay? New puzzle to solve called noted xi. Okay? And to generate a new block I plus 1, I need to find a solution for this previous puzzle. Okay? So if you go online, we can now see what is the latest block. We can see what is the puzzle that people are working for. And now there are all these mining rigs at this moment in China or in other countries trying to solve this particular puzzle. Okay? And if you find the solution, then bingo, you extended the blockchain. Okay? There are your transactions in this block, and you publish immediately this block, so people know what is the next puzzle, and it goes like this forever. Yes?
So this 10 minutes, it's not the average time expected for the puzzle to be solved, but the average time expected to somebody from the whole network.
Yes, it's a very good question. So, so basically it's a very good question. So basically, the system is calibrated in this way that it takes into account what is the total computing power for a moment. And I'm going to show you how it is done because it's also not trivial, okay? But there is this calibration mechanism that calibrates it like this, that on average it should take 10 minutes for people. Of course, there's a high variance because basically the whole work that is done there is just guess until you guess, right? So it can take a minute, it can take 20 minutes. I mean, it really changes. But yeah, and then there's calibration when you need to change the hardness parameter, and I'm going to show you this in a few slides. Okay? But it goes on like this simply. Okay? Yes, I will have some slides on this because there can be something called fork. Yes. Okay, so how it looks like, this is a slide from a couple of years ago, like 3 years ago. I don't remember how much Bitcoin was worth then, but it doesn't matter. So this is like simply like here. I mean, the purpose of the slide is that you can see like the distribution of timing. So it was like it's probably like a universal standard time or something like this. So yeah, so there is, it should be read like this. So there is 4:23, then there was like 8 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 1 minute, 3 minutes. So it was quite fast, actually, faster than, no, here it's 18, right? 18 minutes. So it's 4:41, 4:40. So it changes, but on average it should be around 10 minutes. Okay? Okay, and the information about the state of the blockchain is propagated across the network. So if I'm a new user and I'm just want to know what is the state of the blockchain, so I'm the new user, I can just ask people, hey, what is the latest state of the blockchain? And I may get several of possible candidates for what is the latest, really the last blockchain, but I should have some way to discover what is really the last blockchain. I mean, there can be people who try to convince me that maybe their blockchain is the real one. And it's, in fact, it's not true. There should be some way to find out what is the real one. So what are the main principles? So as I told you, it's computationally hard to extend the blockchain. Once a miner finds an extension, it broadcasts to everyone. And this is the most important thing. We will always accept the longest chain as the valid one. Okay? So if we have several candidate blockchains, the longest one is the one who is the real one. Okay? Yes?
But in theory, you can have 2 blockchains that are just as valid.
Yes, and it can happen, yes. Yes, and I'm going to, yes, thank you for this question. I'm going to do this. Yes, and somehow the system incentivizes people to do this. So basically, it's not that people are like doing it because they are told to do it. It's actually made like this, that at least on the informal level. It's like, it's called, in economics, it's called, I think, incentive compatibility. So behaving honestly is actually the most beneficial thing for me. Okay? Then turned out it's not completely true, but at least that was the intuition of Satoshi. Okay, so when there is a new block, I'm a new block miner and I found a new block, I say, hey, there is a new block, please mine on it. Okay? And people would mine on my new block. And I'm going to tell you in a moment why they should do it. But just to be sure that we all understand how it happens in more detail. So when I have a transaction to post on the blockchain, I broadcast it to the miners and hope that they will add it to the next block. Okay? And again, they have incentives to do it. Okay? So they don't need to be altruistic to do it. Okay? An important thing for the miners is that they should never add an invalid transaction. So like double spending should not be added to the blockchain. And the chain that has an invalid transaction is by definition not valid. Okay? So if I add a transaction that is double spending, then other people should not mine on it. Okay, and then you have this hardness parameter that is periodically changed. Okay? So the problem is that the computing power of the miners changes, right? Initially, very few people were mining. Now, lots of people are mining. So, and we want a new block each 10 minutes because we don't want blocks to appear too fast because then we could like start to be desynchronized. So the hardness parameter is periodically adjusted depending on the mining power. And now the problem is that there is no central authority, right? So we cannot have like a central authority that would tell us what is the next hardness parameter for the next week, say. So the way it's done is that there is a formula, okay? And so basically every time you mine a new block, you put a timestamp, say when did you mine this, okay? Then there is a formula inside of Bitcoin that depending on how fast it was in the last 216, so 216 blocks should correspond to 2 weeks, okay? There's an automatic formula that automatically adjusts the hardness for the next 216 blocks. Okay? No human intervention there, just automatic formula depending on how fast it was. So basically, if it took on average 5 minutes, not 10 minutes, then we increase the hardness by 1 bit, so n is becoming n plus 1. Right? Yeah, and that's possible because there are timestamps there. And just one more thing. So this is a term that you often also find in this, when you read about Bitcoin, there is this term called hash rate. So hash rate is the number of hash functions computations per second. So I told you that proofs of work that we use in Bitcoin are based on hash functions. So hash functions are like simple cryptographic things that are implemented in most of programming languages or operating systems. And they are very fast to compute. So currently, the current hash rate, so hash rate is like how many hashes per second on average all the miners compute. And last time I checked, it was 36,000 petahash per second, which is kind of like hard to understand, but then you can take a logarithm to 2 to the power 65 hashes per second, okay? Which is like huge. It's very big. I mean, it's like early like cryptographic schemes used until the 90s had a key of length 56, which means you could break them by brute forcing, by guessing the key in 2 to the power 56. Okay? And here we have 2 to the power 65 in a second. Okay? So that's like very fast. And it actually changes also very rapidly, okay? So because people are joining. Okay, so basically, so there are lots of these people who are like constantly trying to solve these things and extend the blockchain. Now, what happens if there is a fork? Someone asked. Okay, so what can happen is that there is a fork. So as I told you, it's the longest chain that counts. It's not really exactly like this, but it's almost like this. That it's the longest chain that matters. If I'm a miner and I see a fork, okay, then this chain. I mean, why it's a fork? Because it all has to start with the Genesis block generated by Satoshi, right? So. It has to be a place where they start to forking, and then one of them will be longer. So I just have to use the longest one, the longer one. Okay? So I will say this chain is valid. Okay? If they are equal, then Bitcoin tells people mine on the first one you saw. Okay? This should put additional motivation for people to broadcast their blocks as quickly as they can. Okay? But with high probability, if you have a fork, sudden fork, like it's called spontaneous fork, where two people mine at the same time, then there may be a moment where there will be 2 blockchains of the same length. But due to how probability works, probably one of them will be extended first. And then everybody should just switch to this one. Okay? So this is also why it's important to have it 10 minutes, because if you had like 5 seconds, not 10 minutes, then things could get more messy because the blocks will be constantly extended. But here it's like 10 minutes. It's very unlikely that, I mean, the things that propagate in the internet fast enough that I'm simply abandoning. If there was a situation like this that there was a fork and I worked on this one, and say I worked on this one and this one was extended first, then simply switch. This proofs of work have a nice feature that there is no concept of progress in work there. So it costs me nothing to switch to another challenge. OK, so does it make sense for me to work on a shorter chain? And this is the whole incentive compatibility thing. So if I believe that the majority is following the protocol, I'm in a minority here. Okay? Why would I work on the shorter block, shorter chain? I mean, in the best case, I can maybe extend it. But the majority is already working on extending another one. So I'm most likely working on something that is anyway going to lose the game. So it's kind of, as long as I believe that the majority is honest, it's in my own best interest to follow the majority. Okay? Because I don't want to work on something that has no chance to win anyway. Yes, of course that's true, and as long as we assume that the majority is following the protocol. OK, so the consequence is that the system should quickly self-stabilize. If there is a fork, then one branch will quickly die. The problem is, of course, what if your transaction ends up in a dead branch? Right? That's why the recommendation of Bitcoin is to wait 6 blocks, which translates to 1 hour. To me, as a kind of coming more from theoretical community, all these numbers like 6 blocks, 10 minutes, I mean, they don't sound nice. Like, I would like to see some kind of research that justifies why this number, right? Then Satoshi, of course, never did anything like this. But there were, of course, as you can imagine, since the topic is popular, there were lots of papers on this. I mean, it's impossible to even to follow all these papers that analyze all these things and improve these protocols. OK, so 6 blocks is 1 hour, right? Okay.
Wait 1 hour, the 6 blocks before next transaction or before?
So imagine you go to some place and someone pays you with Bitcoins. Or you are accepting payment in Bitcoins. So to be sure that this transaction really ended up in a blockchain, you should wait 1 hour. Yes. Yes. The problem, the point, of course, is that in most of the cases, this transaction will anyway end up on the blockchain. So you can take a risk. Okay? And of course, the shorter you wait, the longer the risk is. So if it's about buying coffee, then yes. If it's about buying gasoline, probably also yes. If it's about exchanging large amounts of money, for example, because to be honest, this is the main application of cryptocurrency, speculation, right? So this is what happens in reality. People just trade, right? So then you should wait, right? And so one thing that people say, and that's not true, is that, you know, because people tend to say, okay, that since Bitcoin is a great invention, it's good for everything. And then they also mention quick transactions. So that's not true. I mean, this is completely not true. There are ways to deal with this. I'm also working on like how to make this really fast, but per se, it's not fast. Okay, so can transaction be reversed? So imagine I'm an adversary and I want to reverse a transaction. So I mean, what would be the attack? I put a transaction somewhere here. People like build more blocks on this. So if to reverse it, so kind of like to delete this transaction, what I need to do is I need to produce my own chain, right? From this moment, because here the transaction is already included, right? So I need to kind of go back into the past and work on my own chain, right? And yeah, this looks hard if the minority, if you are in minority, right? Because people are already working on extending this chain and they are in majority, right? So, and remember that this requires work to extend. So if you are a minority, then most likely maybe you can build your own blockchain, but it will be always shorter than the real one, right? So nobody will believe you, okay? Unless you are lucky. Well, it's all probabilistic there, okay? Could be lucky. Okay, so how are the miners incentivized to participate in this game? Because mining costs and like people would not do it for free. So the short answer is that they are paid in Bitcoins for doing this. And this I will discuss in a moment, but it's profitable. It's, I mean, this is like an example of like a mining place where they mine and they all mine in hardware. And I mean, especially profitable if you happen not to pay for the electricity, right? That's why some people do it in their departments, or I've heard some gossip that in ECM, our institute here at the university, someone was doing this, but I'm not sure if it's true. And anyway, it was a long time ago. I mean, it's amazing how many cool ideas people come up with. So for example, someone said, okay, computation takes energy, right? So, but energy, I mean, you know it much better than me, of course, that energy is not like disappearing, right? It's converted into heat. So why not to make like things like heating houses that would at the same time mine Bitcoin? But the problem is that in general, like heating a house with electricity is not like the best idea, right? So it's the most expensive way of heating a house. So I think it doesn't make much sense in reality. But I think there were some startups that were actually producing things like this. So. Okay, so that was the first question. And then the other ones are much shorter. And I may actually start skipping some slides. So how are the users identified? So we use digital signature schemes. I have some slides on signatures. I should show them, right? Basically, okay, so basically, signatures is some like a digital analog of writing signatures, okay? So, no, it's not anonymous, of course not. So handwritten signatures, you know how they work, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think it's like outdated slides because now we don't even have like signatures on our new IDs in Poland, but in the past they were, so you can, someone has an ID, has a signature signed. So basically digital signatures work the same way, except that instead of having like an ID, you have like something called public key, okay? Public key is something that is kind of connected to my identity, it's public. And then you have, you have a private key or a secret key that is corresponding to this public key, and the secret key you keep private. And if you want to sign something, if you want to sign a document, you compute what's called a digital signature. And you compute it using your private key. Okay? And everybody who knows your public key can verify if your signature is correct. Okay? This is like an invention from late 70s. So basically like an analog of handwritten signatures. And the analog goes like this, that instead of having like, so what is my ID is my public key, basically. Okay? And then in reality, of course, if you want to use it in like economy, then you somehow have to be sure that my public key is really my public key. That's why you have all these rules. In every country, I think now, including Poland, you have things like law about digital signatures, all these things, but that's not really relevant to today's talk. So there are many signature schemes, and typically they all consist of three algorithms. So one is for generating this pair, secret key, public key pair. Another one is for signing, so you take a secret key and a message, you produce a signature. Then you have a verification algorithm that takes a public key, a message, and a signature and says yes, no, so if it was correct or not. And there are some definitions, like it has to be correct, so if I can generate correctly public key, secret key pair, then if I've signed it's verified correctly. And security, it's much more subtle to define, but intuitively it just means that if someone doesn't know my secret key, then he cannot sign my name. Okay? Okay, so if I want to use digital signatures, I can just publish my public key, and whenever I want to send some message, I will just sign this message and send to people, and people who know my public key will verify if it's correct. And there are many popular signature schemes, started with RSA in the 70s. Then there were different variants. Bitcoin uses this one, it's called elliptic curve DSA. It's some kind of a standard signature. Okay, so how to be identified in a peer-to-peer network? I just, whenever I want to join a network, I generate my secret key, public key pair. Secret key I keep private, public key I publish. And the users I just identify by their public keys. Okay? So I'm not saying I'm Stefan Dziembowski, I'm saying I'm public key number something. Okay? That's why it's so easy to launch this attack called Sybil attack, because nobody prevents you from executing these things multiple times. And everybody can do it, so we can just talk in a group of people, announce public key, keep secret key private, and just sign every message. And I will know you under your digital pseudonym, but at least I will know that if the messages come always signed by secret key that corresponds to this public key, this comes from you, whoever you are. I don't need to know exactly who you are, I just know it's always the same person. Okay, so this is how people are identified, and that's just, I mean, this is an idea that existed long before Bitcoin. What is more interesting now, coming back to Bitcoin, is where does the money come from? So basically, the main point is, and it's kind of linked to this incentive thing, okay? So every miner who finds a new block gets a reward in Bitcoin. And that's, again, something arbitrary, but for the first 4 years, which translated to 210,000 blocks, it was 50 Bitcoin. Then it became 25, then 12 and a half, and so on. I mean, when I say so on to physicists or mathematicians, and they see 50, 25, 12 and a half, then they can imagine what happens, right? It's like halved in every step, right? So this is the point, right? So this is where the 21 million comes from. So because this is like a sum of this. Right? So at some point it will go down to 0. Okay? The reward for mining. Then we'll have something called transaction fees. I'm going to tell you about it later. So how it looks in detail, I haven't yet told you how the transaction look like, but this is like a block, and you should just look at the first row. This is a block from some time ago, and this has like a first transaction that has 25 new Bitcoin that generated, and it has some transaction fees that I'm going to tell you later about, and it goes to some public key. So it's like new money was created, 25 Bitcoins, because it was some time ago. And it went to this public key. This is a public key of the miner, for sure. Okay? So if I'm a miner, I can decide about what is in the block, and for sure what I will do is the first line, I will write this 25 bonus goes to me. Okay? So this is called generation transaction. This is called Coinbase, because it's like the main moment when coin was generated. And this is the main reason why people mine now, because they have a right to put in the first row that the money goes to them. Okay, so this is this. So the new block, every block contains a transfer of a reward to the new miner, and this provides incentives to be a miner, and this also intuitively should make me interested in broadcasting my new block as soon as possible, right? Because I now it's 12 and a half, but 12 and a half times say 10,000. This is a lot of money, right? $10,000. So once I found a new block, the first thing that I'm really afraid of is that there is a fork and someone else found a similar, also an extension, so I'm not going to earn, right? So I should broadcast this as soon as I can, hoping, like people say, I should basically contact as many people as I can and tell them, look, there's this beautiful new block, mine on it, right? Because this should guarantee that my money is there. Because if my block is not included, then money is gone. Okay, and that was actually not true. So if once scientists started to look at this and analyze it, then turned out that if you have sufficiently big control sufficiently big number of miners, but still less than half, it may be beneficial for you to do something called selfish mining. Okay? Selfish mining means once I mine a block, I actually don't broadcast it. I mine it I still keep on mining myself. Okay? Turns out this argument is not true once you really have a scientific approach to this. Okay, and the last thing is what is the syntax of transactions? So the thing I told you about transactions before, that's not like completely true. So Bitcoin uses something which is called unspent transaction output model. And so basically, technically, there is no coin in Bitcoin, you can say, okay? So basically how it works is, okay, so suppose there is like someone mined 25 Bitcoins, okay? It was generated by user P1, and then it was sent to P2, and then maybe P2 divides it between P4, P3, and P5, say 15 Bitcoins, right? Then maybe someone else created 25 Bitcoins, then people can start merging this, so maybe this 15 gets merged with this 25 and goes to P9, right? So you have, when you look at Bitcoin, you basically have a situation when people have some coins, okay? And these coins can come, they have somehow to originate from this coin-based transactions long time ago, but maybe it was like dividing, merging. So it's nothing really deep. It's like banking works, more or less, except that you don't have a concept of account. You just have a concept of it's called unspent transaction output. So there's unspent transactions that are controlled by someone, and this someone can spend them further. Okay? So the transaction syntax is, okay, so if I create a 25 Bitcoin transaction in the mining process, I can send an P1, I can send it to P2, and I would do like this, that I would say, okay, user P1, right, that's me, sends 25 Bitcoins from transaction T1 to user P2, right, and the signature of P1 on this message. Right? It's always the one who is sending money, who is signing. It's like with banking, right? You don't have to agree that you accept some money on your account, right? Some people, for this reason, don't want to have bank accounts, right? But normally people have bank accounts, and if something comes, the bank doesn't ask me if I accept it. So it's the same here. Like the guy who is spending the money is signing, okay? And so on. Okay, so now P2 will say, okay, I'm sending this 25 Bitcoins from this transaction T2 to P3 and my signature on this. Okay? And it's all published as a transaction on the blockchain. Okay, so natural question, of course, is, okay, so this is called the value of transaction. That's maybe so important. Okay, so how to divide money? I can simply say, okay, P1 sends 10 Bitcoins from some previous transaction to P2, 7 to P3, 8 to P4, okay? And my signature on this, okay? This is the signature of P1, okay? So I'm just signing that I divided money. What's more interesting maybe is merging again, right? So, by the way, dividing money is also used very often to give a change, right? So if something costs 10, I have 15 in some transaction, I pay 10 and 5 goes back to me. Okay? Maybe to my old address or maybe even to a new address, it's just controlled money. So multiple inputs is the same, except that you have a number of people who are all transferring money to one person, right? I mean, it could be all happening like virtually. It could be that they are all controlled by, in fact, the same human being, right? But from the point of the blockchain, it just looks like, you know, some kind of virtual users or addresses, how they call them, sending money between each other. So now, what is nice here is that all signatures need to be valid. So basically, this is the simplest example of what is called smart contracts. Okay? So smart contracts are kind of like agreements that are written on this blockchain, So basically, suppose we want to do something like this. We want to collect money for some good cause, right? Renovating the building of my department. Okay? Your department doesn't need it, but mine would need it, right? So, and we want to say, okay, each of us pays 1 Bitcoin for this. Okay? But I don't want to be in a situation that I'm the only one who pays. Okay? So I'm preparing a long transaction that transfers money from all of us to the account of to the address of my department, and this transaction will go through only if we all pay. Okay? So it's like crowdfunding, in a situation where either all payments happened or none of them happened. Okay? And this can be achieved using this kind of syntax, which is nice because that's something you cannot do with banking. Like I cannot do a transfer to some account conditioned on that some other transfer to this account also happen. Okay, so I'm slightly running out of time. I had some slides about my own research. For the lack of time, I didn't tell you about all possible things like attacks on Bitcoin. Okay? So all these things that I was telling you on the previous slides, that was like a grossly simplified view on Bitcoin. Okay? There are many papers that analyze it, find mistakes. There are people who improve it, and so on. And there is no time to talk about this, but just that was an introduction. That was nothing that shouldn't give you like a full image of the area. Now, can I still get like a couple of minutes to talk? Couple of minutes. Okay. Basically, maybe I'll just tell quickly about what I was doing. So, okay. So the first thing I was working on is a better consensus mechanism. So by consensus mechanism, I mean this mechanism of implementing blockchain. Okay. So problem with the current blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, is it's slow, right? It's expensive. And I mean, you can estimate how much it costs now, and consumes a lot of energy. Right? That's like very bad. Because people currently expect new technologies to actually be more green, right? And Bitcoin is a new technology that wastes a lot of energy on mining. So that's not something nice. So then there are lots of ideas on how to make blockchain without this expensive proof of work. Okay? So my idea with co-authors was to replace work by disk space. So to do things like, instead of doing a lot of work, I have to allocate terabytes of bits. I have to devote lots of space on my disk for something. Okay. Yeah, and it was more energy efficient, and there is no hardware acceleration, so it makes no sense to mine in hardware. It will be cheaper, and actually, this is something that people are now implementing. So there are some projects that are working on like making cryptocurrency based on this idea. And then what I was working on, like especially like I was focusing on this in the last years, is cryptographic protocols that use this smart contract feature. So the thing that I described to you a few minutes ago, where you can like make some kind of agreements, like something happens if and only if something else happened. Okay, there is no time for this, but basically, this is like an area on its own, like working with smart contracts. So smart contracts are agreements that you write on the ledger, on the blockchain, and they are self-executed by the mechanics of the cryptocurrency. There are many projects about this, and I have some papers. Yeah, and my recent focus is working on like using this thing to make like fast transactions. Okay, so transactions that happen in like milliseconds. Okay, so I guess that's, yeah, these are papers. Yeah, we have lots of money, and now we got some grants from different foundations, Poland, Germany mostly. Okay, that's it. So thank you very much. Yeah.
No. I would like to ask you about something which is very well known, of course, because it was known in, I think, the end of previous century. It's so-called a digital banknote. Digital banknote, which is similar to the paper banknote as $100 banknote, which is good for everybody because everybody accepts such a banknote as a payment, the first thing. The second, it is anonymous because there is no written on this banknote who is paying and for what is paying. And the third one is very difficult to cheat. It means to give a currency which is not a real currency. And in this Bitcoin scheme, I don't see this thing which is very important for such a payment. It means anonymous.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So I think what you mean by digital banknotes is something which was called e-cash. So that was like a lot of work on the 80s, in the 80s, 90s about this. And it comes from David Chaum, which was a famous cryptographer. And then as some people say, turned out we were climbing the wrong tree. So lots of cryptographers were paying lots of attention and making working a lot on improving anonymity and privacy. And turned out that for an average person, real anonymity is not really that important. Like pseudonymity is enough. And a good example is that criminals adopted Bitcoin quite quickly for this reason. So if it was, if it was anonymous enough for mafia, then probably people believe that, yeah, that's anonymous enough. Now, people, because what you can also, you can create lots of fake accounts, right? You can create lots of fake addresses and like start maybe making fake transfers between them. You have a lot of places to do money laundering there. Then there are all these projects that also my friends are working on making anonymous cryptocurrencies. The most famous ones are called Monero and Zcash. And then they offer true anonymity using some more advanced cryptographic methods. I asked them actually, how do you feel with this, that you're maybe helping criminals? And their answer is that it's basically the same argument as which you hear about should the weapons be legal, right? So some people say the bad guys would anyway get weapons, so by making weapons legal, it's like American argument, right? By making weapons legal, we just help the good guys. And they basically, the answer was similar about this anonymity. So the bad guys anyway have a way to get anonymity in Bitcoin, so by making anonymous currencies like Zcash, we are only helping the good guys. But yeah.
Okay, let's give a chance to the others.
Could you perhaps summarize what was the main new ideas of Satoshi Nakamoto? Because you said that few things were known before, and what was the new part?
Yeah, so the main idea was the consensus, so this blockchain algorithm based on the proof of work. So that you can have a consensus in a fully distributed, permissionless environment based on proof of work.
Yeah, here we have the question.
Very short question. How do the upgrade patches work in the cryptocurrencies? How do you upgrade your system?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So basically, yeah, so this is a question that every computer scientist would ask. Every computer science system, every computer system needs to be upgraded. Now, how do you do it if there is no central authority? I mean, it's a question that theoreticians would ignore, but practitioners would say that's a very important thing. So they actually have a voting mechanism there. Okay? So they have a mechanism where people vote about some. So it's kind of like a democracy there, but democracy is decided by the computing power. Okay? So it's not that everybody has equal vote, because then it makes no sense. You do like this, that the power of my vote is depending on my computing power. And the way they do it is that there are some new proposals about how to change Bitcoin, and the miners vote by including, say, bit 0 or 1 in one of the fields of the new block. Okay? So then you can see later how was the voting. And I don't remember what is the criterion, if it's like just majority or 2/3 or 3/4, but they have some way to see, like after some weeks, they see how many miners voted yes, how many no about a given proposal. But then they also have some kind of wars, like there was a big war about whether they should increase the block size. And there was like, don't remember, I think it ended like this proposal didn't go through, but some proposals actually are passed, like proposals that change the syntax a little bit. Then there are all these problems that syntax is changed and not all the miners change their software. So there were incidents of like forks caused by this, that some miners thought that something is valid, something is invalid. I mean, this is like a whole independent topic of how much human intervention you need there, because there were cases in Bitcoin where they actually needed human intervention. Like people had to sit down and say, okay, we roll back blockchain because something really bad happened. Okay? So nothing is really as distributed as on this ideal picture that I showed you. There's always a little bit like.
Okay, let's give the chance.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you proposed, you showed two ways of doing a digital coin: either waste energy or waste resources into building drives. But could you implement a digital coin that would do something valuable instead of calculate nonsensical equations, fault proteins?
Yes, that's a very good question. So basically, lots of people thought about this, how to make useful mining, right? Because humanity needs computation, so why not to make mining that would do something good at the same time? And so it's surprisingly hard, because you need problems that are hard on average, and you need problems that are very quick to verify the correctness, and you need problems that are also this important feature of Bitcoin, that there is no concept of progress in solving. So lots of people thought about this, and I know only basically 2 examples, and none of them really went none of them was a success. So one was some kind of verifying some mathematical hypothesis about some sequences of prime numbers, and they were mining to verify this hypothesis. So each time you mined, you were like checking if some sequences of primes exist. But it's like questionable if it's really something useful for humanity. I mean, maybe it's useful for some mathematicians. And then another thing was mine so in such a way that you also, to mine, you have to keep a lot of data, but not like random data in our proposal, but data, some useful data for humanity, like the copy of Library of Congress. Okay? So then you don't do any useful computational work, but at least to mine, you need to have a copy of the whole library or some part of the Library of Congress, which means that it's like if there's like atomic bomb dropped on Congress, then this data will survive because lots of people had it on their disks. Okay? Except of this, I don't know any example. And yeah, you can think about it. Maybe you will find something in physics. Although, I mean, this area is quite explored now. That's my feeling. Like this idea of making mining that does something useful, it was a very popular topic. Nothing came out of this. I mean, I don't want to say things like, no, smart people thought about it, so you, so you will not invent it, right? But be careful, like obvious ideas I think are explored. You need to think about something very special.
Okay, one more question up there.
You said that the arguments for anonymous currency are the same as for not having gun control. But the statistics prove that gun control doesn't help the bad guys. The most deaths happen when there's no gun control. So I would say that most of us wouldn't use a currency that requires a lot of effort, a high computational power. Rather, the person interested would be that the people who actually need to be anonymous, hence the bad guys.
I'm not sure if I understand the question. So. It's a remark. Yeah, but basically, I mean, okay, so maybe I'll just use it as an opportunity to say one thing about anonymity. So basically, one problem with this whole model here is that I can trace the whole history of a coin, okay? So I can make, for example, some kind of like an action saying, I know that this is a public address of someone whom I don't like, say Donald Trump, okay? And I know he was using this address for crowdfunding his campaign. Okay? So I know every Bitcoin, every transaction that went through the account of Donald Trump, I'm not going to accept as a kind of statement. Okay? And I call lots of people also to behave this way, right? And in this moment, you lose something that they call fungibility in Bitcoin. So fungibility means that all coins are equal. Coins stop to be equal because maybe they are the value of a given coin depends on its history, how it was going through each account. Okay? So, I mean, it doesn't need to be about Donald Trump. It can be about some oil companies I don't like, right? Like, I don't simply, I start to make differences between coins depending on what was their past. And this kind of people say it's bad in general because it will create like chaos, like, you know, people would lose this thing like fungibility, that I have X Bitcoins is X Bitcoins. Yeah. Yes?
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for a very nice lecture. I didn't really know about the Bitcoin before, but the first impression is that it's a huge waste of resources because we are basically, the whole idea is the paying people for wasting power.
Yes.
And nothing more comes out of it. So, but this was a comment, and the question is, if it's possible, could you maybe give a brief description of how can one replace this power work criteria by this disk space, because it seems very interesting but also very hard, because it's quite easy to cheat on how much disk space you have unless you really use it somehow.
Yes,
and
exactly.
So what is the principle of testing this disk space which makes it useful?
Yes, so maybe just I will have first a comment to your comment. So about waste of energy, I agree with you, although I should probably say that people who are defending Bitcoin, they say that every currency system costs, also in terms of energy. Also dollar costs in some sense, right? So they say, okay, it's like you should not assume, to be fair, you should also count these things. Now, about your question, so it's not trivial, basically, this is the answer. So basically you need to do things like, to mine, I have to allocate lots of random data on my disk, and I have to constantly prove that I have this data, right? Because and it should be taken care that I don't use, for example, the same random data for different currencies, maybe, right? So it should be like dedicated random data, random but kind of tied to a given problem, and say every day I have to prove that I'm still keeping it, right? That I didn't delete. The definition of this proofs of space also takes a while. It's not that simple. Proof of work are very simple to define. Proof of space are not that simple. I can take it maybe offline because I would need maybe to start even using play. But one more thing I should say, of course, what's probably typical for scientists, I was focusing, especially on, on this last slide, I was focusing on my own work, but there is a more popular approach to this problem, which is called proof of stake. But stake meaning stawka, not steak meaning food. So it's called dowody stawki in Polish. So proof of stake means that your voting power in mining depends on how many coins you have. So people say it's like in democracy, right? The more money you have, the more you can influence the society, right? But basically, I mean, of course, the rationale is that if you have a lot of money, then you should be interested in the stability of the system. So you would be only doing good things. So this is called proof of stake, and there are several projects like this, and it's also surprisingly hard to do. It's like looks simple, but then you start to dive into details, and then you realize that the proof of work that Satoshi used are very cleverly chosen, in fact. It's like this has some special features. Of course, it's like a wonderful area for academics. Like there are tons of papers on proof of stake. Lots of my friends also write papers on this.
Could you comment on blockchain as itself? Because also quite
Okay,
often people are connecting Bitcoin with blockchain, but
yes.
blockchain is something independent. Could
Yes,
you give some examples?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. So basically, people separate Bitcoin from blockchain, right? And even to the extent that, for example, in China, using Bitcoins, I think, is currently banned. At the same time, the first secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, like a few months ago, gave some speech that blockchain is the way to go. So Bitcoin, no, blockchain, yes, in China. So the whole point with this blockchain thing is that people use this term in many different ways, okay? The point is that basically the way I think we should think about it is a method for achieving consensus in networks, okay? Consensus meaning that we all agree on one version, okay? Now, computer science, especially theoretical computer science, was studying the problem of consensus since the 80s, okay? With seminal papers, very influential papers, like how do you achieve a consensus about something if you have only peer-to-peer connection? If you study some computer science, it's also called Byzantine general problems. It's like lots of papers. And basically nobody wanted to I mean, people used it, but not really in the strongest way. It was not that popular, okay? Now we come to the industry and we have the same protocols, roughly the same, and we call them, instead of calling Byzantine general problem, we call them blockchain, and the industry loves it, right? Because basically people started to believe that distributed solutions are good, right? So for example, I have this project with Polskie Sieci Elektroenergetyczne, which is like the major operator this is the state-owned company in Poland that operates all these electrical lines, okay? And they want to have a blockchain thing. And why do they want to have it? Because basically, I mean, initially I was a little bit skeptical, but then I actually got convinced that it makes sense because you have all these energy markets, okay? And you have all those things like people have photovoltaic cells that sell maybe electricity to each other, what's called prosumers. Now you need a marketplace for this. You need a place where people would do this trading, selling, buying, right? And can be controlled by a single company, but maybe like trusting in one company to like, control the whole market for Europe, that's not that great also because like where should it be? So you make a consortium. And then you need like a Byzantine protocol, you need a kind of a blockchain protocol to agree on what is the state of the market, okay? So you basically make distributed markets without trusted server. For political reasons or regulatory reasons or ideological reasons, you make it distributed. You don't want to make it centralized. It's just a matter of what you want to build. Do you trust Google completely, or you prefer to trust that out of 7 companies, 6 of them are honest? I mean, it's just a question of ideology. And now people trust less and less companies. After Snowden, right? After all these scandals with like Facebook spying on us. So Facebook starts a new currency. It's called Libra. And then like they announced this, and like a few days later, like Mark Zuckerberg was called to Congress to testify about this. And so it's basically going to be like a currency controlled by Facebook. But Facebook knew that like they have a bad reputation, so they decided to do it as a consortium, so as a blockchain, but like not like proof of work, just blockchain with like n participants. Precisely because they want to say, no, it's not like really Facebook, it's a consortium of parties. Right? So it's kind of like also political. You show that you are not like evil one in cyber corporation that wants to control everything. You make a consortium. Right?
All right, let's have mercy to our guest. The last question, and then we continue on private discussions.
Okay. The proof of work, if you want to base them on mathematics, it seems that all of them will require some energy, because maintaining huge disk space also boils down to energy. But these are alternatives. Now, current scheme is based upon hash computation.
Yes.
So the first question is whether those hash computation will be done by quantum computers, which would close the issue in a while. If not, can you estimate the rise or current, because you said it's as much as whole Ireland. This cost of energy will not go down with improvements of technology. It will probably go up or remain constant. Can you estimate the percent of it? And the last part of the question, because I want to make it as a part of first grade lecture.
One question, it was supposed.
It's a part of the question. Can you explain in 2 or 3 sentences why the proof of work is so essential to the security for a layman?
Okay, so basically the first remark was about proof of space. So proof of space, basically the system would, our system works like this, that so to prove that you did a lot of work, you have to do this work. This is tautology. To prove that you allocated a lot of space, you can allocate the space and then be just from time to time checked if someone can ask you for like 100 random positions. And if you reply correctly, then most probably you have like 99%. You can do the math, right? You probably didn't compress. You cannot compress too much. So this is not. I mean, it is more energy efficient. Of course, there is some energy cost. But what was your second point? Quantum. Okay. So quantum computing will not change much in terms of hash functions, I think, because the generic quantum speedups are like square roots. So I think. In the worst case, we could just change the hardness parameter. This will, for the mining, it will have no influence. It can change one thing. So the signatures used in blockchain are ECDSA, and this is vulnerable to by Schnorr algorithm. This can be broken easily by quantum. But the point is that we also have this whole area of cryptography called post-quantum crypto, and you can easily replace it by post-quantum signatures. Maybe I will say something that will not make me friends in this building, but I personally don't believe in quantum crypto. I think it's a nice research area. I have nothing. I was doing theory all my life. I'm fine with theory. Theory is great, but in terms of like really commercial applications, I think quantum crypto. I don't see a place for quantum crypto now, because basically all the problems that quantum crypto solves, you can solve with post-quantum crypto at a fraction of a quantum.
Okay, I think we stop here. We can continue on in private conversation. Let me remind you that the whole lecture and discussion is recorded and will be linked to our colloquium page in a few days. We thank you very, very much. Really, it was enlightening.